This Real Agriculture podcast is brought to you by Genesis Fertilizers. Nitrogen fertilizer is your farm's #1 expense. Farmers are working together through Genesis Fertilizers to solve the problem of high prices and security of supply by planning a state-of-the-art nitrogen plant. Security and earnings through ownership is the solution. Visit Genesis today at genesisfertilizers.com to learn more.
Shaun Haney here with RealAgriculture.com and Real Ag Radio. It's time to talk about all the different ag policy things that are happening in Canada and the United States. And joined right now by, of course, Jim Wiesemeyer. He is Washington analyst for Pro Farmer. Jim, hey, it's great to chat with you again.
Always good to be with you, Shaun, and on your show.
Yeah, so, well, I can't go too far without talking about, we're recording this on Tuesday morning and Monday night. Now, there was an expectation that at the Iowa primary that former President Trump was heavily favored.
Iowa Caucus.
Iowa Caucus.
Yes.
But boy, let me tell you what, he really, really showed that he has support in Iowa.
Oh, it's across the board. It was impressive. Record margin. He got 51%, and let's basically say that DeSantis and Nikki Haley got around 20% both. The polls were actually correct, Shaun, going into that. In fact, they could have been understating a bit. But it shows you that Trump is definitely it's Trump's political party right now on the Republican side, no doubt about it. And he gained a wider group of people, this time, definitely as opposed to 2016 when he won the presidency. So there's a lot to read into that. The bottom line is that, Vivek Ramaswamy suspended or pulled out of the election. Burgum, the North Dakota governor, came out and he supported Trump. So there's a bandwagon going on here. Next Tuesday is the first primary in New Hampshire. Now, New Hampshire is not like Iowa. So Nikki Haley, I doubt if DeSantis is going to pull that well. If Nikki Haley either doesn't win it or come very close to Trump, this thing's over for the Republican side.
Yeah, she's down by 6 points last I saw, right? Is that correct?
Yeah. And the polls usually are pretty good in New Hampshire. So we'll have to see. Now, I don't think Nikki got the momentum that she really wanted coming out of Iowa. She came in a solid third, very close to DeSantis, but it's not a two-person race yet because DeSantis held on because he still has some money that he can spend.
Yeah, and I've heard different people say that she really didn't have very high expectations at all in Iowa. Her ground game there was not as significant as DeSantis's was. And of course, not too far around the corner is her home state, South Carolina, which if she loses Trump in her home state, that's kind of a clear message indeed.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and the other part too is that she's really looking for some momentum off of Chris Christie bailing because there's a strong feeling that his supporters will be her supporters and not move to DeSantis. But and that's the key there is that's maybe closing some of that gap in New Hampshire.
Agree. And some people say, well, if DeSantis pulled out, wouldn't that help Haley? Not so sure. A lot of his interest would go to Trump, at least half, if not more. So yeah, it's going to be a deciding element in New Hampshire and South Carolina. As you said, Trump is ahead in the polls, so I think that could be Haley's Waterloo. But she's run a pretty good campaign. Interestingly so, Shaun. This, I think, eventually is going to add more pressure on Democratic leaders very privately and quietly to put pressure on Biden perhaps to pull out. But we're a couple of months away from that. If his poll numbers don't increase, in fact, they're going lower, the Democrats are going to worry that they could lose a triad thing, the White House, House, and Senate. And if Trump were to be president, they need at least one congressional chamber to offset a potential second term for President Trump. So all that's going to take place in the next few months.
There was a story in the National Post here in Canada, the end of last week, showing that President Trump is even more popular in Canada than the current prime minister, which I don't think is going to be surprising because current prime minister is behind pretty much everybody. He'd be behind Scooby-Doo if that was a poll. But what's interesting is that he's even more popular in some areas of Canada than even in some parts of rural United States. So there is really a phenomenon here when it comes to support. You know, if you are a supporter of the former president, you're all in on him, and I like
absolutely.
That is like, can you think of another, whether you agree or disagree with, you know, some of his I'll say chaos that surrounds him in some regards. Do you remember a situation or a candidate that has this level of magnetism with what people will call his base?
No, I haven't seen this since the Kennedys, both John and Robert Kennedy, not the current Robert Kennedy Jr., his father. Right. Okay, they had the magnetism, but Trump, I think what Trump is seeing is in other countries, maybe this is Canada, you need a strong leader of what's going on around the world. This is really significant stuff with the Houthis, Iran, China, Russia, all that. And I think Trump is being seen as perhaps the person who could stand up to a lot of these issues. And I think that's why he's gaining.
The antithesis of current Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, really. Like,
yes,
all of the qualities that he had or characteristics when he came in, were sort of they were, well, I'm going to use the word sexy at the time, but I don't want that to be misinterpreted.
Yeah,
but they were very, very important at the time, and that those things have kind of faded away. The pandemics may be a part of that. Like you said, the geopolitical situation, and I think you're right. There's a lot of look at Argentina as another example, right? Brazil. You mentioned some of the others. So populist,
libertarian type of style. It's strength. The only thing the Mideast, Russia, China respects, and Iran especially, is power, strength, and I think that's what you're seeing. And you're seeing this around the world in a number of populist elections. And that's probably what's going on in Canada as well.
I'm going to ask you a question. Is there ever any desire, or do you think there'll be a time where this long process, like I don't know if there's another country in the world, Jim, that takes the length of time that the United States does to pick people that are going to run an election. You are clear cut the winner. And there was a reason for it. And one was, people going by train, place to place. And
yes,
things have changed a little bit when it comes to transportation and communications. Is there any desire at any point to break this tradition of the caucuses and the primaries and just let's do it on a night?
You would hope so, but boy, there's an election infrastructure in this country, Shaun. Can you imagine what the Des Moines Register wouldn't like that, would they? They get all this funding, and the TV stations in Iowa, and you need all this campaigning in certain states. It brings money to the states, and that's, a lot of people don't write about that, but there's an election infrastructure in this country, and I don't see it going away anytime soon.
Yeah. Well, you and I have been talking about this, about, what's ahead from a trade perspective in North America when it comes to the renegotiation in 2026 of the current USMCA CUSMA agreement. And there was an Angus Reid Institute in Canada did a survey of Canadians, and the headline is Canadians fear for the impacts of another Trump term as U.S. election in 2024 looms. And a lot of it is tied very, very much to what we have been talking about. It is this 10% tariff number.
At least 10%. Universal tariff. Universal tariff. Now, we don't know whether or not there'll be carve-outs.
Well, you told me there wouldn't be carve-outs.
Well, that's what kind of his Lighthizer, his former U.S. trade rep, has signaled no carve-outs. Now, what Trump is signaling to farmers is that he'll be right there with payments to them. Now, farmers are hearing that we'll have the Commodity Credit Corporation come and give the payouts, but
that's against that's against some of the things that we just talked about, which is if you're a libertarian, you don't want the government giving you money and having to backstop you. I want to be independent, survive on my own 2 feet. That seems contrary.
Well, it's the isolationist pole in both political parties right now when it comes to trade. And to me, that's scary that we're into this Middle Ages when it comes to trade policy, that now it's insular. It's right shoring, friend shoring, things like that. But if you put those universal tariffs, if Trump is the president and they do invoke at least the 10% across the board tariffs to countries in which we have trade agreements, I mean, look, USMCA, Canada, Mexico, etc., that's a major change on the part of the U.S. And you think Canada, Japan, other countries wouldn't retaliate? And so this is why I don't think this issue has been vetted in the marketplace yet.
Well, Haley made that point in the DeSantis debate last week where she said exactly that. And I would think even in the U.S., in some very lockdown rooms where nobody can hear, there's got to be a lot of concern in some of the U.S. farm groups having to actually deal with trying to fight this kind of kind of a policy battle.
There's a fear. I was just at American Soybean Association meeting last week, and the fear was rampant. Like, if that happens, what do we do? Because they want to go for the future, as we've discussed before. If this sustainable aviation fuel continues, you're going to have more meal to export. Well, that's market access. What do you do with that meal, that extra meal? You can't get rid of it with all the livestock, the poultry, hogs, etc. So, yeah, these have appendages. This story has a lot of legs, but the market is not focusing on it right now, just not.
Yeah, and I know you already sort of mentioned this, but where are the betting lines here in terms of President Biden being the Democrat candidate?
Well, I asked my good friend at the Cook Political Report, David Wasserman. He's a political analyst, a former House analyst for them, and he knows the House. And while he says there's a chance, he only is giving it 10%.
10%?
10%. And that surprised me. I thought he was higher before. So I don't, if I'm reading him correctly, I'm going to ask him again. But I'm telling you, I go back to when March 31st, on a Sunday, 1968, Lyndon Johnson pulled out of the race the year of the election. So it can come late, and the Democrats have a more fluid nominating process. So they could still have some late primaries in their convention in August to pick a candidate. So I'm into this 40% area myself, that Biden could go out. That's where I'm at, but I can't predict it right now.
I was telling you off camera here, I just finished the book that was written about Mitt Romney. And did you know that I think it was September, he was polling so poorly as the candidate that he actually went to the president, or he went to the head of the Democrats. I'm getting all the terms wrong, but I apologize. But he basically went to the committee and said, do you want to put in another candidate?
He went to the Republicans.
Or sorry, the Republicans.
Yeah, Republicans.
Sorry, jeepers. I have no idea.
That's all right. Yeah,
he went to the Republican National. He went to the Republican National Committee and he said, "Hey, I'm not we don't look like we got a good chance here. Do you want to switch?" And they were like, "Are you kidding me? Now in September?" So that was an interesting piece from the.
That's pretty late. That is pretty.
That's
really too late. That's too late. That's too late because you got to get on the ballot. See. Yeah. There comes a juncture at which it becomes too late. But if Biden were to exit, then you have to have a very named candidate. Gavin Newsom, governor of California, Whitmer, the governor of Michigan, and although she despises politics, Michelle Obama could be watch her name surface because she could be a formidable candidate against a Trump candidacy because that would resurrect the old Obama coalition. It would
that's
bring
not a new face. That is not a fresh face.
not a, but it would bring the enthusiasm factor back to the Democrats in numbers and enthusiasm. I think she would bring both of them. So I'm not, again, I can't predict that, but better not rule that out.
We used to talk about Oprah all the time. That one's that ship feels like it's sailed too a little bit.
I think it's sailed. Yeah, I think it's sailed. She's more focused on Ozempic losing weight rather than running for president.
A lot of money.
This is early. It's early in the process, but so
that's my point. This is such a long How are we early? I love it. Like I'm addicted to it. Like I don't get me wrong, but it just I find it fascinating because other countries do it just so much faster.
Yeah. Well, Iowa does vet. Iowa is a caucus, so they do vet. But I always have liked New Hampshire because they're much more breadth and they're much more they're not as homogenous as Iowa is, to be blunt.
That's the other part. Both parties don't do it the same. And never mind both parties doing it the same. Each state does it differently.
Yeah.
Canada's a country where elections are federally regulated. So like it's every province is this like it's so that's the uniqueness and maybe in the US people don't even realize how unique this process is in comparison to some other countries.
It is. And the beauty of the electoral system, even though some people, a lot of people, growing number, wants to go with the popular vote, which would not be good at all.
Right.
That states like Montana have much more say. You would never have a presidential candidate go to Montana, Wyoming, or other states if it was not based on electoral votes. So that's the beauty of our system where the rural, not just the farmer vote, the rural vote counts for a lot.
Full 100%. Okay. And I, if you look, you just contrast it with your neighbor to the north, Canada. When there is a federal election, there's a lot of candidates that do not even they have no desire, no need to really go to rural Canada because they know, well, the Conservatives pretty much have the vote wrapped up for the most part, but they're spending time in Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver. That's because that's where the most ridings are, and you are entirely that is exactly why candidate Ron DeSantis, candidate Nikki Haley, or they're running for the candidacy. That's why they're showing up on AgriTalk in the last couple of weeks because of that electoral college. That does not happen.
No, they would never come on an ag radio program if it wasn't for the ever. I agree with you.
100%.
And that's the beauty of our program. Plus a more lengty process, vets people, vets the issues. Of course, but we don't know whether or not there'll even be debates. Because if it's Biden, do you think the Democrats want Biden to debate Trump? I'm not quite so sure.
Well, and if Trump's got a big poll lead on Biden, if those are the two candidates, he ain't going to debate either.
He won't. And he scored during this last time where a lot of people wondered whether or not he made a mistake. He did not. It was the right way to go. And his acceptance speech last night was interesting. That was the different Trump. That was the conciliatory Trump, more presidential, because he congratulated DeSantis and Nikki Haley and Vivek, who he said ran a good campaign. He almost got 8 percentage points. But he won 98 of the 99 Iowa counties, only Johnson County. So that's it's just impressive. His depth that he expanded, and that tells me he definitely had a good ground game. He delivered.
Hey, before I gotta let you go, continue resolution. And that's all related to the government shutdown. We were watching with interest. Is this government gonna have money to function?
I think they will. I think the Senate will have a vote. At least they'll have a cloture vote this evening, Tuesday evening. So I think it'll pass the Senate. In the House, I think House Speaker Mike Johnson, Republican from Louisiana, is going to need more Democratic votes probably than Republicans. Reason is he can't go through the Rules Committee, his own Rules Committee, because they wouldn't give him a rule. So that's why you have to go to the full chamber where you need 290 members to vote. And the only way you get that is with a lot of Democrats. Now, if that's the case, will some of these rebels in the Republican House want to do him in? Will they want to vote him out like they did Kevin McCarthy? I don't think that's going to happen to Johnson. I think that would only happen if he gets into a Ukraine deal for more aid to Ukraine, or if he signs off on the Senate border security language bill, because the House Republicans think it's way too weak on the Senate side. And it tells me also that the Republicans want to wait a while on further aid to Ukraine until they get a full accounting from the Biden White House on where the over $100 billion has already gone to Ukraine.
But what continues to be sort of left out of the discussion is the nuance around that support to Ukraine, because a great portion of it is actually in weapons, in artillery. It's not actually in a just sort of here's a bag of cash and do with it what you want, and there's no accountability to that. Because if that was the case, then that's a really good point. There should be accountability to it. But if it's supplies, are we worried Ukraine is selling the artillery? Like, I guess, why are we talking more about this nuance?
There's a little of that. Look what's happening in China. I think their leader, Xi Jinping, has really changed his military system because of the graft that he's found out in his own country. When there's so many billions of dollars being spent on defense, and that's going to continue because you have leaders around the world. Look at the UK this morning. The defense people there is pleading with the G7 and G20 nations to increase their defense expenditures because they see the growing more than kerfuffles going on around the world, China, Russia, Iran, Iraq, North Korea, etc. So, yeah, I think that there's I think a number of Republicans suspect that there's been some graft in Ukraine, and they want details.
Well, I wish, when Canada's going to have an election in 2025 or earlier, but fall of 25 is the latest they can choose to have. We don't have set election dates. And I wish, and I'm going to be deeply disappointed, but I wish defense spending was much more of a prolific issue when that election does happen, because I believe it needs to go up. One is the fact that it's incredibly underfunded at this point. We're still facing cutbacks, and the fact the geopolitical situation out there is not great. And Canada's position, like, there's a whole bunch of stuff that adds up here. Canada's basically said, you know what, we're outsourcing our military protection to the United States, because if we get in trouble, it has always been the situation, at least in modern history, that the U.S. is there to defend us as a neighbor.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying the U.S. isn't going to, but I'm not sure that should be our national security plan. So
the country should defend themselves however they possibly can. History is replete with that one. And, to bridge some things together here, I tell farmers, I said, this farm bill, you better be worried about this debt situation, because after the election,
yep,
the Republicans are going to go back and to be a more normal Republican and worry about the debt, because that debt agreement expires in 2025.
Mm-hmm.
And where's your farm bill going to be if you wait to do it then? So I think I'm still not going to rule out a farm bill yet this year. So because of that, I think there's a big search on for that additional billions of dollars in funding for our so-called reference or target prices. So don't rule that out. We even have a tax reform package going through, Shaun, that is bipartisan, $70 to $78 billion package. For agriculture, that's important because it would resurrect deductions for farm equipment. It would, on the Democrats' side, it would be, it would give some of their social programs, child tax credits, not as illustrious as it was during the pandemic era. But I'm not going to rule that out yet this calendar year. Because some of these other ones are going to expire at the end of 2025, the so-called Trump 2017 tax cuts. But also for agriculture, included in the current package, is disaster aid, and that'll include agriculture. So that's being put in there to garner more votes. So watch that one. That's a surprise in this town that you could have a tax bill in an election year.
It's amazing to me how things run in parallel, because I think, in Canada, the version of the farm bill is the Canadian Ag Policy Framework. Same kind of idea, and same issue. Right now, it looks like Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives will win the next election if polling holds. And Poilievre is very much a fiscal hawk, and there's going to be a lot of attention paid to the deficit.
Yeah.
And if you don't think there's going to be some pretty sharpened pencils when it comes to some of the budget and some of the funding of agriculture, it's going to happen.
Yeah.
And so, same exact, we're running in parallel there. And it seems that's, and I'm not saying, and there should be a closer look at some of the funding and make sure there's no wastage and things like that. But don't be surprised if it doesn't happen. Don't be surprised when it does happen.
Yeah. The secret to getting a farm bill this year is if there's an agreement to open up the Commodity Credit Corporation Charter Act. That's the funding mechanism that Trump used for the China trade war payments to farmers. And that's the same mechanism, the Charter Act, that Vilsack, as USDA secretary, has used for some climate change, over $3 billion. Vilsack is beginning to urge Congress to tap the CCC Charter Act. I talked about that in my morning report today, but some people say his strategy there is to do that, to tap the CCC, because he wants to keep the nutrition, the food stamp funding as is, if not increase it, and he doesn't want to move conservation funding from its now stated purposes, billions of dollars, into a farm bill funding escapade. So I think there's some interesting strategies going on there. But what your audience, I want them to hear is that although the hurdles remain in a farm bill, you can still get one in an election year. And farmers, to me, I think would be better off to get one because of what we just discussed. 2025 is going to be a big focus on deficits and debt. The underlying, all debt is accumulation of deficits, and they're growing in the U.S.
Yeah, I think it's the same in Canada as well, Jim. Hey, Jim, this has been awesome. Thank you so much for joining me.
Anytime.
Really, really appreciate it, man.
Anytime.